Good afternoon, and welcome to the breakout session on empowering girls through education. My name's Patrick Hines. I manage the Education and Workforce Development track in the Commitments Department at CGI. I just wanted to note that this session was originally scheduled as a small group discussion, and we were anticipating a handful of our core participants to continue a conversation that's been ongoing at CGI, and that was certainly quite exciting. And I certainly don't want to downplay those opportunities because they're fantastic. But I have to admit that I was just exceptionally pleased at the fact that because of the extraordinary member interest in this session, we had to move to this larger breakout room. And that's exciting for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's clear that CGI members identify education as a critical tool for empowering girls and women. And second is that not only does the topic, have interest for CGI members, it's that they understand why this conversation is valuable. And it indicates that CGI members want to know what the successes in this space look like, and they also want to consider how they can shape their efforts to meet the ongoing challenges in this space. When you're thinking about that how question, how are we going to face the ongoing challenges, we're extraordinarily fortunate to have an exceptional panel and moderator here today to begin to shape our thinking on some of those topics. And so I don't want to spend too much of their time, since we do have a hard stop today at 3, going on about sort of my general excitement about this conversation. So with that in mind, I'd like to hand it off to our moderator, Dino Varkey of GEMS Education, and the rest of our panelists who can join us on stage right now.
Good afternoon and welcome. This was meant to be a small group discussion, but we are certainly excited as we were looking around the room at, I suppose, the commitment that this critical issue has drawn. We are privileged and honored to have with us a very, very eminent panel. To my right, Dr. Banerjee, who is the Ford Foundation Professor for Economics at MIT and the co-founder of JPAL. Dr. Urvashi Sani, who is the guest scholar at the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution and founder and CEO of Study Hall Educational Foundation. And finally, Madam Lima Bowie, Nobel laureate and founder and president of the Bowie Peace Foundation. They bring with them different and valuable perspectives. And in their words and their actions, day in and day out, this panel and this group of people breathe life into what is one of the most critical issues that we face today. I, for one, hope to learn from their experience, but much more importantly, we wish to genuinely understand what has worked in this space, what challenges remain, and what we collectively can do in order to build on the momentum and progress thus far. If you're in this room today, know that we are united in the belief that providing access to quality education provides the most powerful catalyst to addressing and resolving some of the world's most pressing problems. So, without further ado, let me actually turn to Dr. Sani. And given your experience with Study Hall Educational Foundation and the research areas of interest that you pursue, what is the imperative on focusing on investing in girls' education?
Thank you. Thanks very much for that, and thanks for including me in this conversation and giving me an opportunity to share my experience with you. The question of what is the imperative to focus on girls' education really has a very simple, unequivocal answer. That because it's a girl's right to fully human functioning, and so we need to focus on girls' education. Because without girls' education, we will not gain gender equality. And gender equality is an objective in its own right, regardless of all the development goodies that come with it. And I'm so very glad. I just read the World Bank report on gender equality and development that finally it has been registered, gender equality as a goal in its own right. Yay. Better late than ever. But we've got it. And that's really the simple answer. I know it leads to economic growth. I know it leads to health benefits. But even if it didn't, it would still be a right for every girl to have a fully human functioning. That's one. So let's look at where we are. Governments have been working hard, development agencies have been working hard, and community organizations have been working hard for a long time, focusing on girls' education, led by the efficiency argument till very recently, but even then they've been working. So where are we? In terms of enrollment, we are almost there. With gender parity, even in a country like India, where I come from and where I've been working for the last 26 years on education, we have above 90% enrollment in primary school. At the same time, there are 67 million children worldwide that are still out of school, 72 million children out of secondary school. And even worse, 150 million children at risk of dropping out, and 100 million of these are girls. Right? In a country like India, where 29% of our children drop out by primary school, 46% by upper primary school, and 62% by the time they reach high school, right? So we don't know whether the enrollment story really is doing very much. Girls are coming to school. The sad news is they're not learning a lot. In India, the new annual status of education report by Pratham tells us that only 21% of our children can read a simple passage or do simple division, right? And most of the girls out of school, most of the children out of school are girls from poor and lower caste communities, right? So why are they dropping out? One, it's not important for girls to education is not valued for girls. Girls are not valued. India has the highest rate of female infanticide, female feticide, right? 3.9 million girls and women around the world die every year, out of which 2/5 die before they are born. And most of those, and a lot of those come from India and countries like ours. So it's not valued for them. Secondly, it costs too much. Even though education is free in countries like India, it's who's looking after the children at home, who's doing the housework, way more important to keep them at home than to send them to school. There's a lot of violence at home. Mothers are getting beaten, children are getting beaten, and research tells us that 1 in every 2 women worldwide has experienced some form of violence, sexual, emotional, or physical in the world. Early marriage. I don't even want to call it marriage. I think we should call it child slavery. We dignify it by calling it marriage. There are 10 million child brides all over the world, and 1/3 of those are from India. 57% of our girls are getting married before 18. In states like Rajasthan, 57% plus 7% under 10. And 71% of the girls who are getting married early drop out of education. Right. And then, of course, poor curricula and poor teaching. So what's the solution and what do we do? And here I want to borrow from my own experience. In 2004, we started a school for girls who came from the poorest communities and came with all the disadvantages that we've been talking about. We went house to house, recruited 30 of them, and guided with the liberal belief that if you give girls access to education, everything will work. What do you know? 1 year into the program, we realized that they were not attending a lot, they were at risk of dropping out, and that we needed to do something else. But we looked at the girls' lives very closely and shifted gears. And let me describe what some of these girls' lives are like. So there's Lakshmi, whose mother died when she was 11 because she didn't get health care in time, leaving behind a family of 5 siblings. She went to work. They worked 7 homes. Her sister, who's was 8 years old, worked in 3 homes, and together they earned 2,400 rupees a month, which is under $50. And they raised the family. The father was an alcoholic, and all he did was beat them and sell their books to buy his alcohol, and sometimes the food. There's Khushbu, whose mother died when she was 3, whose father married again. The second wife died when she was 6, and then she dropped out of school to look after her siblings. All the children came with these disadvantages. And as we looked at them, we said, hey, what do these children need to learn? There's something else we need to do. So we shifted our thinking from learning outcomes to life outcomes. And we thought very hard, what do these children need to learn in order to survive, in order to have a better life? And I thought back at that time to my own life. I was born in a very patriarchal home in India. My parents came from Pakistan. And I was married off at 17. And something happened along the way that I'm here now, right? And what was it? And I thought back to that. And what I remembered, the most important learning that helped was the learning that, hey, I was an equal person with equal rights, and that I deserved to make a plan for my own life and to work at it. And let me tell you, it was not an easy learning. And when I first thought of it, when the understanding came, I had to whisper it because I was scared that someone might hear, and that wouldn't be good at all for me. And that's what gave me the courage and the strength to fight everything that I had to fight, to get myself an education, to resist the things that faced me, and to go through life. I said, that's what they need to learn. First of all, they need to learn that they are equal people, that they deserve, that they have the right to a full human functioning, and we put that at the center of our school enterprise. We built our school into a structure of care, a structure of supportive relationships. And we taught them, like we teach them math and science and language, we put empowerment right at the center. We would form cultural circles, and we would talk about all the problems that they had. We would show them how we taught them their rights, the legal rights that they had. We helped them understand that they were equal people. We gave them a structural understanding. And I remember that's the other thing that helped me. That, hey, it's not my father, it's not my brother, it's a patriarchal structure, which just builds inequality into it. So we taught them that this is, why are they subordinate? The causes of that subordination, that is not God-given. It is humanly constructed. It can be deconstructed. So we started to undo gender in our school. And we did it as an official part of the curriculum, not as an add-on. We didn't think our girls had learned unless they had learned this too. And what's the outcome? I just told you where our girls came from and all the difficult circumstances. We have an attendance rate of 85%. We have a dropout rate of 7% as against a national rate of 62%. We have graduated 3 cohorts, all 100% of the ones who have graduated, and 93% of them did, are enrolled in a tertiary program. They're all gainfully employed. What do you know? Lakshmi is now working at a call center. She earns 7,000 rupees. All her children are in school, and she wants to be a software professional. And I think she'll make it. Khushbu is finished. She's graduated. She's enrolled in a BA program, and she wants to be a teacher. Right. And our goal was not only to help them look at themselves as equal people, but to help their communities look at themselves, look at their daughters as equal people with entitlements. So what are the lessons learned? I think the lessons learned are that we need to look at learning differently, that we need to look at the content of what we are teaching our children. And we keep talking about relevant curricula. But what is relevant, right? And we need to put empowerment right in the center of our curriculum as an official part of it. We've been asked to scale our program by UNICEF. We're trying to scale it, and I'm here at Brookings actually working at how to scale the model. And in conversation with many people from GEMS, from CARE, and looking at how we need to build textbooks, we need to do a lot of work to grow the program. And if you don't scale it properly, it doesn't work. But the important learning is that unless education speaks to the condition of your life, it's irrelevant. and then it doesn't work for you. And the important thing that happened was that our students became agents, so that they are no longer the objects of the educational endeavor, but active, proactive agents of the educational endeavor. And I think the broader learning from that too is that as we talk about everywhere in the world, here too I believe there's a 40% dropout in high school, right? That learning is in crisis. Children are not learning, right? So why aren't they learning? Because they're not engaged. Maybe our curriculum is out of date. Maybe we need to, if we're looking for gender equality, heck, put gender equality in the curriculum. Teach them to be equal and directly. If we're looking at race equality, caste equality, they should be talking about power relations in the curriculum. There should be an open discourse on power. If we want democratic societies and equality as a basic tenet, then we should be teaching our students, empowering them in the curriculum. It should be as important. Maybe there's too much focus on technology and science and too little on human rights, equality, violence.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sani. Appreciate that. I do want to come back to the question of scale at a later point, but Dr. Banerjee, if I can turn to you. You co-founded the Abdul, Latif, Jameel Poverty Action Lab. I'm going to turn to you for the evidence.
That's a bit my unfortunate lot in life, that I come after an exciting talk like this and I have to summarize the evidence. But it's a cross I have to bear. So what we do in JPAL is we kind of generate and put together kind of what we think is the quality evidence available on different questions. And I think I was invited to speak here because we were just funded by MacArthur and Marshall Foundations to come up with a document which summarizes what we think is hard evidence on the area of post-primary education, so everything beyond primary education. And what I want to pull out of that is what that says particularly about girls' education. So I think the good news, was already summarized, which is that there's a fair amount of, even in post-primary education, which is a much harder area, the girl-to-boy ratio has been rising and rising fast all over the world. In many parts of the world, it's crossed 1, including countries like Bangladesh. So not just in Latin America, where it's certainly crossed 1, but also in countries like Bangladesh, it's crossed 1. So that's the good news. Now, there's also another piece of good news, which in some senses is I think maybe less obvious and maybe less expected, which is that it turns out that to the extent that there are interventions on what we would call a demand side, making it easier to go to school, rewarding parents if they send their children to school. There's a lot of what are called conditional cash transfers, different rewards. In India, there's this program of giving girls bicycles if they go to school. These kinds of programs, the response of girls to this is enormous, unprecedented, and some ways quite unexpected. So there's been a long tradition of thinking that basically if you want a girl to go to school, you'll have to compensate parents for her labor. That just doesn't seem to be true. It seems to be, few dollars, $5, a bicycle, something quite nominal will get them into school. So getting girls, what is the I would say the great positive surprise of, I think, the last 10 years of research is that small things, making it much more salient on something salient on the education side, get parents to think that if my girl goes to school, I get this little thing. That seems to be enough to get girls into school, at least at the margin where we are, which is that in many places only 50%. In South Asia, the girl school participation rate is less than 50%. So this is not necessarily this isn't the last mile problem. We are talking still in a context where girls are, most girls are not going to school. But it's at this point, getting more girls into school it looks easier than one would have expected. Indeed, what's been striking is that the only places where boys are more responsive than girls tend to be in countries where boys go to school less. So it seems to be partly a function of where girls are, precisely because a lot of girls who might have expected to go to school don't go to school, they seem to be willing to go to school with small rewards, small incentives, small innovations in the system seem to move them into school. That's the good news, because it doesn't seem like as big a challenge. We are not, I think we learned the same lesson with primary education. After spending, I think, a long time speculating about child labor, we discovered that suddenly with small changes, 100% of children basically enroll in school. So again, I think we overweighted the kind of, if I would say, the structural constraints that come from that side. That's not to say that not other constraints, but let me come to that. So now, what's interesting is that, so why don't they go to school? If it's so easy to get them to school, you know, a few dollars or a cycle will get them into school, why don't they go to school? Well, it's because I think people don't have faith in the school as being a useful institution. I think that's the fundamental problem, is that many people's expectation from the school systems are very low. And that's what I think in the end, if they really thought that, you know, like the schools that Dr. Sarni was talking about, they were actually good schools, then I think there is no lack of demand for such schools. Where there is lack of demand is because people don't believe that the schools deliver. And I think that creates, so other things, just to lay, you know, for example, there was a lot of discussion of why girls don't go to school. Well, there are no toilets in schools, and what do they do when they were menstruating? So there was a very nice experiment in Nepal where they provided the girls with menstrual cups to deal with this. Turns out that the girls love the menstrual cups. They use them all the time, but it didn't change anything in the schools. So that whole story about, you know, how toilets will get girls into school, kind of, maybe there's some truth to it, but I think right now my guess is that was overstated. So there's a lot of these whereas I think where there is less talk, and I think what's central, and that sort of goes back, I think, to the discussion that Dr. Sani started, which is that I think this question of content and getting parents to believe that schools are actually delivering useful things, girls to believe as well. I think it's not just, you know, if you look at one striking fact that people don't comment on is how low the attendance rates are. 50% is a high attendance rate in some areas. So these are, like, girls are enrolled in school, you get them enrolled, but they don't go. So it's some sense, this all reflects the fact that nobody has enough faith in what the schools deliver. And I think that in the end has to be, for girls as well as eventually for boys, that has to be the central problem. Schools have to be willing to deliver or convincing people. Now, it's interesting how, again, small things can change. So there's a very nice study in India where it turns out that who becomes the head of the local government is determined by whether that's reserved for women or not, is determined by lottery. So you could have looked at places where by lottery, it turns out the head of the local government job was reserved for women. If you look at those places, girls are going to school much more there. They are completing education much more. If you ask them what you're going to do for a living, they say 18% more say that we want to get a job. So it's just, I think this idea that somehow education delivers. So one thing they saw is that these women who were getting into government, they tend to be women with an education. So they change their aspiration. This connection between what they're relevant to their lives and what education delivers is still very weak. The main reason, however, I mean, there are lots of nice evidence on this. For example, there's a study in Haryana where a guy went around and told some random group of parents, you know, there are jobs in call centers. And what happens when he does that? 2 years later, he goes back and finds that many more girls are in school. And not only that, the girls are taller. Parents have started feeding the girls more. I mean, it's kind of amazing stuff can happen once people actually invest hope in these things. And I think that Having said that, I would say the biggest sticking point right now is just what is delivered in schools. And that's a sticking point which is not just one that's getting worse. Why? Because more children are coming through the primary system, the pressure on the system is going up. The demand for highly educated people is going up worldwide. And as a result, teachers are getting good teachers are getting more and more expensive. It's very hard to get them into good people to teach school. That's a generic problem across the world. And I think finally there is the fact that was mentioned, which is that the primary school system is failing to teach children. So when you get to post-primary schools, you get there without knowing how to read. So how do you take somebody who's now supposed to learn physics and history and human rights, but can't read? What do you do with it? So that poses an enormous challenge for the whole system. And this is unfortunately where the research, which is where this whole our efforts, we're launching an initiative in post-primary education because we feel that this is where enormously important area for research, almost no research gets done. And to take some examples, a very good example was brought up, which is what's the balance between content, life skills, and vocational? I mean, what balance do you want? This is a question that there's lots of views on this, but really no hard research. Or how do you use ICT? ICT is being sold all the time, but if you look at the evaluations of like the one laptop per child, the two evaluations both with negative or zero results. So this is not to say that these technologies won't work. I'm a complete convert to the view, or actually always held the view that if the technology is used in an intelligent way, in a way that actually fits in with the pedagogy of the school, then they will work. But part of the problem is these are being put in as sort of technological fixes without understanding how they fit into the pedagogy. In general, thinking about how to create creative pedagogy, how do you get in a situation where teachers are scarce? How do you substitute for teachers? How do you create ways in which the community can teach? How can you bring the community in? How can you get older teachers to children to teach younger children? How to design curricula that support learning rather than just create fixed goals for children? All of these questions of fundamental importance. I think in the end, the girls' education question, you forgive me for saying this, is going to be the boys' education question. It's the question of education, and we'll have to solve it somehow.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. Madam Lima, your story is obviously an inspirational one, but can you share with us the importance that education played in your own life and in your development?
Thank you. I'll tell my story backwards. When I celebrated my 40th birthday, and it was a drive after the Nobel, 20 years from now, what will I be able to say, or what impact would I say I created on girls in my own country and globally? So the first starting point was, let's do scholarships. And I thought, it's easy. You're just going to find money, raise scholarship, and send girls to school. And then we started in February. Then I started getting, you need to read this data. You need to see this analysis. You need to think through this paper and say, gosh, I should have just stuck with peace activism. Because it's almost like going back to school all of a sudden to learn about a whole new field. One of the things that every one of us or everyone else on this panel have said is that the enrollment rates of girls has shot through the roof. And it has a lot to do with women's leadership, which is, that's a close link. When President Sirleaf became president of Liberia, the enrollment rate of girls went up. The adult literacy classes for women went up. Everyone wanted to go to school because the possibility of being something big was there. What we found earlier on was the retention rate So there is this rush when school is about to start, and then 2 months into the school year, it dwindles down. And so these past few months, I've been reading, breathing, thinking girls' education in ways that will help our scholarship program make a difference. And my own conclusion, and these two doctors said it, is that we've missed the mark, whether it's in Liberia, Nigeria, or the US. Our education system is not holistic. There's a total disconnect from going to school and the job market. From primary school to secondary school, there's a disconnect. From secondary school to university, there's a total disconnect. From university to the job market, there's a disconnect. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you go to schools where you sit and children are reading American history, when the settlers came in Africa, please tell me, what does that have to do with their future? These people came, they created one of the world's greatest countries, and it's done. So where is the connection there? You have critical issues impacting children, like Doctor said. Women's rights. But you still have curriculums that tell young children this is a man's job. So if you read some of the literatures, the policemen, the police and the soldiers and the doctors are all men. And the teachers and the nurses are all women. So our curriculum still reinforce that gender stereotype. That's the first thing. I have a 3-year-old, and we sent her to school when she was 2.5. And over the last few days, we've been getting, Mommy, I don't have my knicker on. There is a need to wear short trousers in school for fear that someone might try to do something. Schools have become one of the most unsafe places for girls in most of our communities. One of the little girls that we just put on our scholarship took out of the community. She's 16 and the only one in her community who made it to 8th grade without getting pregnant. When we asked what her biggest fear was of her English teacher. Because every time she went to him to say, I don't understand this particular text, he said, get under it. And she said she got afraid because he just impregnated her 16-year-old friend. So reference to getting under it was come and sleep with me. That was her interpretation. You go to countries where you hear about the molestation of girls, but these people in the system are protected by unions and protected by different things. So that's the second thing. The third thing, you have governments that are writing very beautiful policies on education, but the total lack of political will to push it forward. So you look at the education budget of most countries versus their defense budget, it's always the smallest. So you have all of these complications. And then you ask yourself, so what is the way forward? I think, one, we need to really start more advocacy around reform, educational reform, because, again, we will talk the jobless youth in all of our different nations, which is the next war that we're going to fight. And we will continue to see jobless youth because we have not created that link between where they come to school and how they get a job. And until we can do that, we will all be sitting in powder keg, because when it explodes, for one reason or the other, we will not see peace or the light of day. So advocacy around reform, but not just reform through words, but reform through budgetary allocation and just really seeing people move. How do you have a minister of education who never leaves from behind his or her desk? We went and did an assessment in one of the communities, and we're sitting and presenting our findings, and there was the coordinator of girls' education in Liberia. And she turned to me and said, really? And I said to her, if you are a little child, I will slap you right now. Because it shouldn't be really. This is your job. You ride a huge SUV around here, and you've never taken up time. So we really need to start that first level of advocacy. That's the first thing. We have to start making schools safe for our girls. Really naming and shaming those teachers who go after little girls. And I mean, if you go to some of the places that I've been, someone is teaching and two of the girls in the class have babies for him, and he's still in the classroom.
Put him in jail.
So we need to, that's the second thing, make education fine. One of the drive, and I said I would tell my story backwards, for starting this foundation and trying to make education available for some of the very brave girls that I see my own life in, is that most times people would give 1 year scholarship and let's see how you do, and then would think about increasing it next year. I got sick and tired of seeing girls being exploited. So we decided we will launch something. Even if we educate 5 girls in 10 years, we will provide full 4-year scholarship for college, books, and if you want them to come to the U.S., you have to be prepared to find travel grants for them to have a connection back into their society. So that's the work that I'm doing now. My mother had 5 daughters, 5 girls, and fortunately for us, we had this one man who was the minority in the house, but who had the loudest voice, but believed so much in the power of the girl. And I remember my mother lamenting that I don't have a son, and my father would always say, Rachel, what God has not given to you, don't push for it. Every time she adopted a boy and brought him home, unfortunately for her, as he grew up, he either turned into a criminal or he did something, and my father would say, God knew. That's why he gave you these girls. Let's focus on them. I went to a place in my own life where had I not made up my mind and the drive was not there and the support after 4 children to go back to university, I won't be sitting here. And it's because people invested in me. So last night I said at the Goldman Sachs dinner, I believe in God. But my next belief is in the power of women and girls. I believe in them, and I believe in their potential to change the world. But this will only happen if we stop speaking from the corners of our mouths on education and really make those painful changes that we want to see. Because in my part of the world, in other parts of the world, like the girls she talked about, you find very brave girls who, against all odds, when everyone else is agreeing to sleep with this teacher, I'm saying no to him. When everyone else is refusing to walk 45 minutes to school, I'm still doing it. When all of the girls drop out of high school because they've been taunted by boys, I will be the only girl to graduate. We need to stand behind those girls because they are the next generation leaders, and they are the next African women, Asian women who will be sitting on this stage at CGI telling us, this is what you did right.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dr. Sani, let me go back to you. You are now looking to scale what is already a successful model. If you had a blank sheet of paper, what are the things that you need in order to be able to scale the model, and who do you need support from in order to be able to scale your model?
I think first of all, we need... I think in terms of our model, the first things we need to do is put our learnings into a systematic way in terms of making gender studies for a scalable, graded, age-appropriate gender studies course into place. And we thought we would start it at upper primary, and then our teachers told us, heck, they get married when they're 10. We should start in grade 3. And so we've started with third grade. What we've done with that is that we've developed it bottom-up, thinking of things like sexual abuse, domestic violence, early marriage, just understanding marriage, understanding patriarchy. And we've tried to build this literally with the help of our students. We're trying to now develop textbooks, like Gems has done some of it. And we would try to advocate very hard to put it into to talk to policy people, to talk to educational departments, to make it an official part of the curriculum. And that does many things. It becomes legitimate knowledge, first of all. For example, when we told our girls to talk about caste, and we told them, well, you need to go and talk to your families and get this interview data. So the parents would say, why are you talking about caste? And, it's not your place. They say, the school has asked us to do this. So, okay, so it becomes official, and that's when the discourse starts even in the communities, right? So it becomes empowered as an official piece of knowledge, which it should become, just like math and science and everything else, right? Secondly, you focus on teacher training, and it becomes part of what teachers need to learn, right? That is the other important to think of. And so we would need to, once you make that, then you need to work with teacher training institutes, and we are working with the diets in UP, with 70 of them. And to just go back to the ICT question that, Abhijit, you raised, that we've videoed all our discussions. And we've turned them into a curriculum which we are giving to other people to show how you can unpackage in a very simple way a complex idea like patriarchy and how it impacts your life. How do you talk about power relations with young girls so that they understand very simply why their father has the right to beat them senseless, why he can marry them off at 10, and what are their rights, right? So to use ICT in terms of scale, because India has a huge problem of scale, so we are trying to reduce it to the simplest possible form that we can, right? Then, of course, it needs advocacy. And it needs for schools, as you said, ma'am, to become safe places and to make that a part of the educational agenda, right? To include the community in terms of, first of all, for teachers to change the way they look at their role, that they become mentors, they need to look at children holistically. Secondly, how do schools interact with communities so that communities begin to understand and value their daughters, right? And I think most importantly, in order to scale, to advocate for the idea that education and curricular building, like you said, must start bottom up. It must start from what are the needs of specific communities. And in this case, what is the chief unequalizer? Is it race? Is it caste? Is it class? Is it gender? And to make that the agenda of your education. Because eventually education is for life outcomes. And I think jobs are important, they really are. But when you look at the gender stories, with education, with jobs, women are getting beaten up. Right? The one thing that the World Bank report tells you is that in terms of gender equality, the things that have not happened are agency and domestic violence. It hasn't gone down, despite highly educated women, right? And they have jobs, right? So importantly, you need to look at, and in order to scale it, I would look at many fronts. You would need resources. You would need to talk to governments and policy makers, to education departments. It would need to go into teacher training. It would need to become just like any other course. Let's start developing courses on, let's start making it an intellectual, a subject that you think about intellectually, about class, about race, about caste, about gender. Let's look at it intellectually. Let's change the curriculum. Let's bring it up to date. Let's look at what's happening in the world and what's needed. When we think of 20 years hence and 30 years hence, what's the kind of world do we want? And what do we need for it? We don't need more mathematicians and more scientists. We need all of that too. But you need along with that. And in our case, it's not as though we didn't teach math, science, and we only have them for 4 hours, and we only spend $350 a year on every girl, and yet they graduate. The government-mandated syllabus with much higher scores. Most of these girls come with no electricity at home, no lavatories at home, right? And they get all of this. So you don't need to drop something in order to add something. You need to look at things differently. And I think with people, the moment you start looking at yourself differently, you start treating yourself differently, and the world begins to look at you differently. And that's how the world changes. So.
Thank you. Dr. Banerjee, in the research that JPAL is undertaking specifically in post-primary, do you think that the evidence and data and research that you're able to gather together will be enough to mobilize sufficient political will in order to make the fundamental changes that we're talking about within education? Is evidence enough? Or or do we need more?
of course, is not enough. I mean, that's. I could just stop there, but I assume you want me to say more than that. I think they're two separate issues, and I think the issue that we often focus on is one where is sort of an issue of know-how, which is, how do you get, what's the best way to do something, what works and what doesn't, and that's extraordinarily important. That's what we do in JPAL. But I think there's a separate, in education, I think there's a separate and rather equally important battle to be fought, which is sort of a battle for the, if you like, the soul of the education thinking community. And that's really, I mean, in some ways, I think the part of the problem of education has been, at least, let's say, in South Asia, which I know relatively well, a dominance of education for some abstract ideal of, grand knowledge and or engineering school entry, rather than education for people's lives. And I think that battle is one that needs to be engaged as well. So I think that part of the challenge is always get governments to take up what you've learned, and that's a challenge. But in some ways, governments, to me, my experience has been that the biggest roadblocks come not from the governments themselves, but from education experts who say that that's not education. Education is this, and it's not that. And I think that's where I'm always. So in some ways, I think the evidence will play both kinds of roles, we hope. Now, let me end by saying that evidence is not being generated. The reason why we did this paper was to actually, the paper I started by mentioning is to I highlight the fact that not us and nor anyone else is generating high quality evidence. There is interesting stuff going on in the world, like the programs that she described, but it isn't the case that these are being rigorously evaluated. The evidence isn't out there, and we really need to generate that evidence. That's sort of why we have decided that we're going to create this initiative as a way to get people to do more research on this and generate the evidence. Evidence isn't there.
And we're happy to now go to questions from the floor. If you can just state your name, the organization that you represent, and just be clear in who you're directing the question to, we would appreciate that. There's a lady in the front. Just here. Lady there. Just there.
Oh, I have two for the price of one. I like that. I want to thank all the panelists, and I want to thank Lima, my sister here. And what you said is something that I'm seeing in my own organization, putting girls in secondary education. Because primary education is easy, but when you get to secondary education, you have other problems to deal with. And every part of the world is different. India have similar problem with us in Africa: early marriage, sexual abuse, and every kind of different abuse, and the lack of confidence of the parents in school. And I face that all the time, especially when I go to the countries where I'm putting girls to school. It's for me every day, it takes more out of me to convince the mother and the father that what we are doing with trying to put the girls in school is worth it if they give them the chance to do it. And the question is always, how can you guarantee me that my child won't get pregnant from a teacher? And sometimes I just sit there and I'm like, okay, that is a concern. School is not safe. The content of the school is not safe. It's not good at all, because she said something that made me smile but bring me back to my time in school when I was in secondary education. And at one point I sat down there in school learning the Second World War, the First World War, the history of the geography of America, the history of all those places. And one day I stood, and I'm in Benin, and one day I stood up in front of the teacher and said, what about our own history? What about me knowing what is going on in the country next door here? In Africa, for us to know what is going on in any country, you have to go through BBC or you have to go to the French network. That is something that is really damaging for us, because you don't have the information, you don't know it. And one other thing is also that the teacher cannot explain to you why in the curriculum there's nothing about your own history. I have to learn about my own history once I finish and I go home and I read in books. And I was fortunate enough to have a mother that went to school, a father that went to school, that give us access to books, to music, to sport, because he believed that we as his children will make the choices for our lives later. And my father always will stand up. Every school year, he has 10 children, 3 girls and 7 boys. And every time he goes to the school, to the principal, to pay the tuition, he tell him, here, my child is learning what you have to teach my child through the books. You raise a hand on my child, I'll sue you. My child come home and report any abuse. Before I put you in jail, I'll beat the hell out of you. My father is not a violent man. I've never seen any African man that keep his cool. He's just like constant, because he always said, your ultimate weapon is your brain. Use it and challenge anyone. The color of your skin doesn't matter. So if you have that home, you can do it. So here I am trying to do the same thing, having girls in school. And I'm facing the problem of violence in school, violence at home, and no government help in Brazil very much. So what Lima said makes huge sense. You cannot have a minister of education in any countries that sit behind his desk. Today, I was saying to somebody, I challenge any leaders in Africa to give me name of 10 young entrepreneurs in the country. They don't know it, they don't care. So how do we work within those conditions that are so difficult, especially when you're a woman and you're going to villages, talking to fathers, to mothers? How do we switch the brain of the people in the village and bring the leaders in our countries to be partners, not only financially, but accepting the fact that the change we're talking about in school, they implemented it in school. Even if they don't give us the money, they have to help us bring that knowledge to the kids. How do we hold accountable our system of law in Africa and our leaders when it comes to sexual abuse? When you talk about rape in school, I say put them in jail. Why are we so afraid to put those people in jail? The teachers feel in Africa untouchable, so they can do whatever they want. It is true that I've met girls that said, I'm not sleeping with nobody, I'm going to school. So we have to follow those girls, but yet our work that we are doing, we have to do the advocacy work toward our government for them to give us the tools to not allow any teacher again, ever, in any other circumstances, to abuse those children.
Angelique is very passionate about girls' education, but one point that I would like to raise, coming back to the whole issue of retention and what we see, one of the things that we don't flag most of the time is harmful traditional practices. We saw within our own, looking at some of the communities that we work in, when the enrollment rate in primary school is so high, and then the retention rate in junior high school and senior high school starts to dwindle. We had a thing 2 years ago where we brought 150 girls to sit with President Sirleaf, about 100 of them. And one of the little girls raised a very crucial issue. She said, Madam President, we have free primary education, so our parents will send us. By the time we're at 13, it's time to go into the secret society to do the different things leading to FGM, and then come out and get married. The reason why they send us is because they're not sure if they invested in junior high education and senior high education, we won't come home pregnant. Can you have junior high education free? Then by the time we reach 9th grade, we would have made a point to them that we're actually serious about education. Last year, they passed that. But also, you can pass all of those laws if the government and their local government authorities do not put in the mechanism that those girls will not be taken out of school at 13 and carried to a secret society for 3 years or 1 year. And she comes out at 16, 14, 15, and there's a man standing there waiting for her to get married. We will continue to see some of those things that we're talking about.
Can I just talk to that a little too? That, in fact, social norms are probably the biggest culprit, which is why I keep hammering home that in part of our content, get them young and try and get them to look at social norms differently. In terms of resistance, part of what we do in our school is teach the girls to resist, not school. We have an all-girls school and it's all women teachers by design, so we don't have this problem. But what we do have is awful abusive practices in families, right? So what happened with that was that there was one of the Khushbu, the girl I talked about. When she reached class 10, and she topped her class, mind you, her father decided it was enough. He wanted to marry her off because it was cheaper this year than it would be 3 years later. And now, the stepmother decided, she was by then onto her third stepmother, incidentally, and 6 daughters. And that I need you to stay at home and it's enough. She resisted, and I still remember I was talking to the parents and trying to convince them, and she was standing at the back, and she kept saying, but I'm going to study, but I'm going to study, and I was marveling at her courage. That night, he beat her senseless with a rod. But by then, she had built a peer network because of the school. We got wind of it. We called Childline. We called the cops. When we called the cops, they said, we can't find the house. We made sure they found the house, right? And she was saved. We went home, and when I spoke to the mother, she said that, but the biggest thing was, how could she call the police on me? This is her father. So I said, you know, if he beats you, we can still call the police. She said, in her mind, this is my Lord and Master. He can beat me, he can kill me. It's acceptable, right? Just that change made, and now she has graduated. So that, I think, building resistance in subordinate groups is really important. Secondly, when you give them agency, what did these girls do? Lakshmi and Khushbu and all her friends, they formed a group called Virangana, which means Woman of Courage. And in their own community, they ran a signature campaign from the men, I promise not to beat my wives. Women, I promise to resist. And if my sister is getting beaten up next door, I promise to go and help, right? Against early marriage. What do we do with our school? We make the parents sign a bond saying that I know that the legal age for marriage is 18 and I promise not to marry my child before that, right? It's not legal, meaning we can't hold them to that. At the same time, they can't say they didn't know. And somewhere it hits home. And over the 8 years, we have found there is a change in the community, right? So the important thing is for schools, for communities, that we can't keep waiting for the government. I say. At the same time, with students, that's what I meant by saying give them agency. When you make them agents of your own change. I didn't have parents who were supporting me. In fact, every time I had a book and my father came in, he would say, why are you reading and why aren't you helping your mother? Right? So I learned to hide my book. Wherever he came, I just sat on it and pretended I didn't, right? At the same time, when I learned that I was an equal person and I had to put together this knowledge, when I learned about the structure and I understood power, that's when I became an agent. I became an agent of change in my own life. I became an agent of change in the community. And that's what is happening with our girls, that they're becoming agents of change. So I call it from personal activism to social activism to political activism, right? So we need many more activists in their own lives and in things, so that there is a resistance, and then there's a demand and there's advocacy. Why just we the advocates? Let them be advocates for themselves too, as Khushbu did, as that group did, right? So.
Thank you all for a very interesting discussion. I just wonder, I'm from Tostan, an organization working in Senegal for 20 years on non-formal education. And the idea first was to start with adults and do human rights education, democracy, problem solving, hygiene, health, and economic and social empowerment, in other words. And then we had difficulty with the adolescents because they hadn't been through this human rights education. As you say, it's very important. So we started with the adolescents also. And I just wonder, because of this both of them being educated, it's a 3-year program, the adolescents and the adults. They're on the same wavelength. They're all learning about human rights. They all decide to change social norms together. They decide with the men also on board. And when I mean, amazing things have happened. Over 5,000 communities have abandoned female genital cutting, and they have abandoned child marriage. And they've decided this together as not only just a community, but they've reached out to their whole social network to change those social norms. And I'm curious, I mean, it seems really hard to go into a school and have the children start to do this human rights movements and then go home and be confronted with adults who have no idea what they're talking about. And have you ever thought about doing some kind of non-formal education within the community? Because we have found that it's amazing what is going on when both the adults and the adults and the adolescents together are coming to decision and consensus around a different future for the whole community and, again, the whole social network.
Yeah, it's a very integral part of our work that we have mothers' committees, and every month we have counseling sessions. So we do individual intervention counseling. We have collective counseling in terms of just talking about human rights, talking about their girls. The girls will present to their parents when they come in forms of drama sometimes, just so that they hear their pain, they hear their voice, right? So we do a lot. I agree with you that you have to have intervention, you have to have work with the communities too. And so there are three parts to it, actually. One of it is building, I call it building a universe of care, but care is like a bad word, so let me use a stronger, more academic sounding word. Building a supportive network of relationships. That includes many things. Teacher-student, student-student, teacher-community, right? And when we talk about the community, we talk to parents. We enlist the support of community organizations like Childline. We enlist and enforce the support of community organizations like the police, right? And that together forms the network that supports these women. And so, for example, in terms of Khushbu, what the other girls told me, they said if there hadn't been the supportive network, she would have dropped out, or she could never have stood up. It's because she knew that there was this supportive network around her that she was able to stand up. And then that was an example for many of the others. And I think these girls were really brave to go back into their community. They called the cops too, by the way. They came, they staged a rally, and they called the policemen to stand there and speak to the community about domestic violence being illegal, like any other crime, about child marriage being illegal, and inviting them. So I think it requires, again, it requires a holistic, it requires the effort of every organization that we have in the community. So if we want democracy, it can't happen just at a public level. All our institutions need to become democratic. And I think for that, it needs a concerted effort from everyone. And we underestimate students and their agency. It's very important to make them agents in the endeavor of education and social change. So.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Dearborn Davis. I'm with the Aquila Institute for Women, which is the first women's college in Rwanda. And in Rwanda, with a majority of women in parliament, they have incredibly powerful role models. They have equal women in primary and secondary education. And yet still 80 to 85% of women work in subsistence agriculture. So my question for the panel as a whole is what comes next? And what are some examples that you've seen of higher education, specifically market-relevant curriculum and job training, that gets these women into the workforce so that you don't end up with secondary school graduates, young women that have to go back to the fields because they don't have a way to get into the workforce?
I'm an African, and sometimes I wish it's not too good to sidestep the issue of the percentage in Rwanda. One of the things I've said, and before I answer your question, I keep asking my fellow activists, there's something called the African Feminist Forum. So we go together and we rant and rage, but we also ask critical questions. And I've been asking for the last 2 years, can we do a study to see how this percentage in parliament is impacting from girls' education to women at the grassroots community? It's not just good enough to celebrate. Let's see what it's doing to transform. And when this morning, fortunately, I woke up and went to a 5:30, I would say, packed myself on the back, 7:30 in the morning, breakfast on job creation in Africa. And one of the speakers was the finance minister of Nigeria. They were asked to put forth practical solutions to some of the problems. And I was amazed to listen to their own way. They have 3 areas. And I think for Rwanda, this is something that your university will want to look at. From agriculture to agri-investment. So instead of looking at it as farming, to take it from that business perspective. For example, in Nigeria, bread is a big thing like all of us, but they don't produce wheat. So cassava, they have now something called the bread made from cassava using the flour from cassava. How do you open a whole market around this for women so that it's not just farming, but it's taking it from the farm into factories and factories into stores? These things are attractive, and since this is what the people are close to, you want to start to think about something like that. But I think it comes back to the whole question of education. What is it that we're offering young women and young men that makes at the end of 4 years, I go back to my village and become a farmer? How can we change the way we see education? And I think for Africa, that is a serious question. And I know every other part of the world has their own challenge, but when it comes to our own continent, that is the challenge. How do we make education really practical for what we have? Many resources, but when it comes to the industry of those resources that we have on our continent, the workforce is often imported. You have all the experts on oil and gas industry coming from the West or coming from other developed countries. You have all the experts on gold and diamond coming from other places, whilst our university continue to give sociology and accounting degrees and all of the different degrees. How do you now start to think about natural resources, the wealth of the continent, and linking it to the educational sector? I would think that's the way to go.
Thank you for a really interesting panel, and Lima, you're always fantastic, common sense and direct approach. I'm Jane Werwand. We just finished a commitment to CGI called FIGHT, Financial Independence Through Entrepreneurship, where we funded 25,000 women into their own businesses in 57 countries. It was a partnership between my company, which is Dermalogica, it's a skincare company that supplies the salon industry, and Kiva.org. So my point is, surely there is a strong argument for vocational trade skill training in school. We've talked about Africa and India. We have a huge issue here in America and in Europe with this massive amount of unemployment. My mother was widowed at 38 years old with 4 girls to support. I was 2. She was a nurse. If she hadn't had her training, and if we'd have been born anywhere else in the world, maybe my story would have been completely different. I am an entrepreneur. I came to the United States in 1983 with a suitcase and a diploma from a beauty school. I went to school, and vocational training was very, very common. And there's some VOTEC, vocational technical training, studies in place in the United States where rather than having, as we do in Los Angeles Unified School District, over 70% dropout of minority girls in high school because they leave because their education isn't relevant to earning money and they want to get a job. A 4 years college diploma or a degree is a lofty goal and an impossible goal for a lot of girls and boys because they want to earn money. They want to get into the workplace. And if they've left studying books that are outdated and redundant, they leave way before then because they see that it has no merit to what they want to do. In the 25,000 women that we've helped fund over the last 2 years, this is a common story. These are women who have a simple skill set. Why can we not start teaching that in schools as an option? You know, I mean, it's all very well. I can find any amount. My company is a very successful company now, and we employ over 1,400 people. Every product's made in the United States. I can find any amount of MBAs. There's absolutely no shortage. I'm on the board at Anderson School at UCLA, and I can pick up an MBA tomorrow if I wanted to hire one. I need a bloody electrician. I mean, I don't know about you, but to try and find a decent plumber, electrician, somebody who can come and do something, and I've never had a woman electrician come to my house, by the way, which I think there's such huge opportunities. The lesson my mum told my sisters and I was, girls, it's not about an education. It's about learning how to do something that can put food on the table, and if, God forbid, happens to you what happened to me, you can keep your family together. So why can we not revamp, at least give a track in our educational system that allows people to learn while they're at school, starting at 15 or 16, along with their basic and well-needed, of course, academic studies, but when they then graduate at 18, if they're not heading off to college, they actually can head out and start their own business as an entrepreneur. That's my point.
Thank you.
Can I just make a very controversial statement here? And I'm saying this as an African, and I'm going to throw caution to the wind, because I've been told when you're a Nobel laureate, be careful what you say, because everything is a quote. Instant quote. But I'll say something back to your question. In Africa, many years ago, they had something called the secret society, the Sunday for girls and the Poro for boys. And my mother is a student of the Sunday. I never went to the Sunday. In the Sunday, she went at 13 and came out at 16. Those were their former schools. Year 1, they were taught economic empowerment. Year 2, they were taught health, basic health and nutrition. And year 3, which is the one that has been blown over in the media, was preparation for marriage, including the FGM. All of the women in my family that went to that school, I have never seen them hold their heads or fold their arms when they felt on hard time, because there was always a skill that they could exploit to make money. Is it cooking? Is it basket making? Is it weaving cloth? They all had that skill. If we took our educational system back to some of those things, let's not just criticize. How can we go back and learn? Because the focus on that education was a wholesome community. So even though I did not go there, but when my child is convulsing right now, and I didn't go to any first aid school, but she taught me, you have to take that deep breath, as frantic as you may want to be, wrap a piece of cloth around that thing, and put it in your baby's mouth so that he doesn't bite off his tongue. Take some cold water, put it on that child, and then find the nearest health center. I didn't pay a dime to learn that. Children today finish school and they have no idea. So a baby has fever. The first thing, if you're in a typical African community, the mother has taken off her clothes and she's screaming, running down the street. The men who went to that society went for 4 years. And I have never seen my dad raise his hand at his wife, because they were taught hunting and other things, and the last year was to protect your family. And studies have shown in wars, most of the men who went through that process are the victims, because they refused to take arms. We have all of our criticism. How do we come back? And these are the same. My dad told my mother's family when they came and said, because the thing had come down to 6 months, and it's just now the cutting part. So when they came to us and said 6 months, 5 daughters, let's go, he said, any soul touch any of my daughters, I'll kill all of you. Every man that walks through the door of our house and say, I want to marry this girl, my father said, look at her. Do you see any scar? No. Do you see anything? No. Take her. You beat her, I'll come for you. If you're tired, bring her back home. What is in our current educational system that we can teach our sons to be able to say no to violence? How can we learn, as repulsive as FGM is, and you have studied it in your work in Mali, I'm sure, and Senegal and other places, what it originally was. And I'm not saying take it, but what can we borrow from it? How can we teach the girls in Liberia tie and dye as part of their academic studies? How can we teach them basket making, beads making, because we know there is a market, so that when she finishes high school and there's no money to go to university, there's something to fall back on. I tell anyone I'm grateful for that education my mother got, because with or without a Nobel thing, I can go in the market and sell, and these braids I can do.
Dr. Sani, please.
I just wanted to add to. I know, no, you just get.
Learn each other name on the panel, and I'm like dark and dark and dark.
No, but I'm just speechless, so I'm just trying to catch my breath. That's all. Is that in terms of answering your question, that one of the things that I think does make the difference is building aspirations. And helping with what we do is that we teach our girls from class 8 to plan. So what do you want to be? Again and again. What do you want to be and how are you going to get there? Right? That is very important. In terms of community mobilization, we have mobilized the corporates to engage our students in training, in hotels, in call centers. We engage them in apprenticeships in schools as library assistants, as technical lab assistants, as receptionists, learning skills, ICT skills, right? That is all part of their training. And when they finish, India has IGNOU, which is the Indira Gandhi National Open University, highly respected distance learning program. All these girls need to work to support themselves. They've been doing that since they were 7. Since they were 8, since they were 9. Food is not the issue. They managed to earn that much just with domestic help, to bring the food, not just feed themselves. I'm so impressed, feed a family. So this child was working in 7 homes, and coming home, the 5-year-old was cooking, and the 1-year-old, they were babysitting. And nobody told her to do that. She did it. There was no orphanage. There was nowhere that they went. She just knew how to do that, right? Now she's earning 7,000 as a call center, at a call center, and she is pursuing her BA through the IGNOU, through a distance learning program, right? So you have to be flexible in many ways, that how do you get yourself a degree? How do you keep working? How do you get placed? And one of our students is here on a community college scholarship. And one of the things she wants to do is start her own business. That's what she wants to do. And so I think when you look at, I think, again, it's a question of changing the way you look at education. And if the goal is how do we help these girls get better life outcomes, then you work at it from various angles and do what you can. And with community, not just parents. There is everybody else in the community that should be helping. And they do, in my experience.
Dr. Banerjee, if you were to summarize any closing remarks from your perspective on the issue.
Yeah, I mean, closing remarks sound scary. I think that the thing that I very much appreciate from my co-panelists, I learned a lot, is this emphasis that somehow that, you know, education needs to be rooted in life. And in some ways, there is a certain conflict between our sort of very classically modernist vision of what education should constitute and what in practice we need within our lives, and it's a conflict that's I think we need to face. I think that was very nice about what Lima said, is that we have to face it on. I don't necessarily think that the solution is to go back to these secret societies, but I think the basic thought that somehow we need to be engaged at the level of realizing that part of what we do is we build our societies, and we can't build new societies without engaging with the existing ones. We cannot just sort of posit that this is the world we want and get it. I think that's what I think is. I think part of the problem of education has been this disconnect between the reality education functions in and the abstractions that all of us would love to have education deliver. And I think that came very well. That came out very well in this panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Would you please join me in thanking our panelists? Thank you very much.